It's kind of wild to think that thousands of years after it vanished, one civilization's fingerprints are still all over our modern world. So today, let's dive into the foundations of ancient Greece, a world of intense rivalry and an absolutely incredible legacy. I get it. It seems like ancient history, right? A world of togas and temples. So how is it possible that it still shapes our politics, our science, even our art? Well, the key to unlocking their incredible influence, it starts by throwing out one big misconception about what ancient Greece actually was. You have to forget the idea of a single, unified Greek empire. The reality, it was more like a patchwork of fiercely independent city-states. These guys were rivals, constantly competing. And it was this intense competition that was like a furnace, forging one incredible innovation after another. Okay, so to really get the Greeks, you have to start with their fundamental building block, and that's the polis. This is the absolute key. Okay, so try to imagine this. Your city, your town, has its own government, its own army, its own unique identity, but you share a language and worship the same gods as the city just down the road. You might be allies one day and bitter enemies the next. And that constant tension, that pull between a shared culture and fierce independence, is exactly what made the Greek world so unbelievably dynamic. And when you talk about rivals, there was none more famous or more consequential than the clash between the two superpowers of the Greek world. This was Athens versus Sparta, and this was way more than just a political fight. It was a clash of ideals, a battle for what civilization should even be. This chart right here really says it all, doesn't it? You've got Athens, totally focused on the mind, and then you have Sparta, all about the body. Athens championed democracy and debate, while Sparta was this rigid military state. The ideal Athenian citizen was a thinker, the ideal Spartan, a warrior. It was a fundamental conflict between participating in your city's life and just complete obedience to the state. So let's take a closer look at Athens. This is the birthplace of democracy, where regular citizens could literally gather in the open square and debate. It was this total hotbed of intellectual energy, home to philosophers like Socrates and Plato who questioned everything. It was a city that truly celebrated the mind, that valued art, theater, and the sheer power of a great argument. And then you have Sparta. This was a whole society basically engineered from the ground up to be a military machine. From the moment you were born, Spartan life was about brutal training and absolute devotion to the state. The individual meant nothing. The collective, it meant everything. The Spartan was the ultimate warrior, defined by strength, duty, and just a hard life. Okay, so with all this crazy rivalry, you've got to be wondering, what on earth held the Greek world together? How did they see themselves as, Greek? Well, despite all their differences, they were bound together by some really powerful cultural threads that made them all unmistakably Greek. Well, the biggest unifier by far was religion. From Athens to Sparta, all Greeks worshipped the same family of gods up on Mount Olympus. And these weren't some distant, perfect beings. No way. They were flawed, they were jealous, they were superhuman-like. From the thunderous rage of Zeus to the clever strategies of Athena, their shared stories, their myths, formed the very bedrock of their culture. And if you want a perfect example of this weird mix of rivalry and unity, look no further than the Olympic Games. It was a religious festival to honor Zeus, sure, but it was also the ultimate competition. For a little while, wars would actually stop, and athletes from rival city-states would battle for glory, not on the battlefield, but in the stadium. And it reinforced the one thing they all were: Greek. And all this competition, all this energy, it fueled an absolute explosion of genius. In architecture, it gave us the Parthenon, a symbol of perfect balance and harmony. In math, you've got Euclid's geometry, the stuff many of us still learn. Science had the amazing breakthroughs of Archimedes. They totally revolutionized medicine with an ethical code and created art that still defines our ideal of beauty. This intellectual firepower was a shared Greek phenomenon. But as you can probably guess, this golden age of independent rival city-states, well, it couldn't last forever. Conflict would eventually just consume them, and it would lead to the end of an era. But, and this is the crazy part, it was also the beginning of their global influence. So how did it all fall apart? Well, it kind of happened in stages. First, you have the Persian Wars, which ironically forced them all to unite against a common enemy. And for a while, that created a really strong sense of shared identity. But as soon as that threat was gone, that unity just crumbled. They turned on each other in the devastating Peloponnesian War. It was basically a civil war led by Athens and Sparta that just bled the Greek world dry. It left them weak and vulnerable for the conqueror who was waiting in the wings, Alexander the Great. But here's the incredible twist in the story. The guy who conquered Greece, Alexander the Great, was actually tutored by one of their greatest minds, Aristotle. He was a huge fan of their culture, so as his empire grew, he didn't crush Greek culture. He became its biggest exporter. He literally carried their philosophy, their science, and their art across the known world, from Egypt all the way to the borders of India, kicking off a whole new Hellenistic age. And that, right there, brings us full circle, back to today. The ideas that bloomed in those little rival city-states are now fundamental to our own world. Think about it, the very idea of democracy, the philosophical practice of just asking why, the methods of science, the structure of a play we see on stage. It all has roots right here. So in the end, this small collection of competing, squabbling cities, born 2,500 years ago, left us with the building blocks of the modern world. Their legacy is democracy, science, and philosophy. And that leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. Centuries from now, what fundamental ideas will our civilization be remembered for?